Joseph Stalin remains one of the most controversial and destructive figures of the 20th century. As the leader of the Soviet Union from the late 1920s until his death in 1953, Stalin ruled through fear, violence, and absolute control. Under his leadership, the Soviet state committed massive crimes against its own people. These crimes were not accidental results of war alone, but often deliberate policies that caused immense human suffering. Understanding Stalin's crimes is essential to understanding how totalitarian power can destroy millions of lives. Stalin rose to power after the death of Vladimir Lenin. At first, he did not appear to be the most powerful figure in the Soviet leadership. However, through political manipulation, control of party appointments, and the elimination of rivals, Stalin gradually concentrated power in his own hands. Once in control, he reshaped the Soviet Union according to his vision. Regardless of the human cost, one of Stalin's earliest and most devastating crimes was forced collectivization of agriculture in the late 1920s and early 1930s. Stalin believed that private farming was incompatible with socialism. He ordered millions of peasants to give up their land, animals, and tools and join collective farms controlled by the state. This policy was enforced violently. Peasants who resisted were labeled kulaks, declared enemies of the state, and punished. Hundreds of thousands of kulaks were arrested, deported to remote regions, or executed. Entire families were torn apart. The sudden disruption of agriculture led to chaos in food production. Grain was seized by the state, even in areas where people were already starving. This policy directly contributed to catastrophic famines. The most tragic example was the famine in Ukraine from 1932 to 1933, known as the Holodomor. Millions of Ukrainians died from hunger. Stalin's government continued to take food from villages while denying that a famine existed. Borders were sealed to prevent people from escaping in search of food. Although historians debate legal definitions, many agree that this famine was not a natural disaster, but a result of deliberate state policies. It stands as one of the worst crimes of Stalin's rule. Another major category of Stalin's crimes was political repression. Stalin was obsessed with control and deeply suspicious of anyone who might challenge his authority. This paranoia reached its peak during the Great Terror of the late 1930s. During this period, the Soviet secret police arrested millions of people accused of being enemies of the people. These accusations were often completely fabricated. Victims included party officials, military officers, intellectuals, scientists, artists, and ordinary citizens. Many were forced to confess to imaginary crimes after intense pressure. Show trials were held to publicly condemn supposed traitors, creating an atmosphere of fear and obedience. The consequences were devastating. Hundreds of thousands were executed, while millions more were sent to labor camps. Even high-ranking members of the Communist Party were not safe. Stalin eliminated nearly all of the original Bolshevik leadership, rewriting history to present himself as Lenin's only true successor. Central to Stalin's system of repression was the Gulag, a vast network of forced labor camps spread across the Soviet Union. Prisoners were sent to the Gulag for political reasons, minor offenses, or sometimes without any clear charge at all. They were forced to work in extreme conditions, often in remote and harsh environments. Life in the camps was brutal. Prisoners suffered from hunger, exhaustion, disease, and cold. Many died from overwork or neglect. The Gulag system was not only a tool of punishment, but also an economic system. Prisoners were used to build canals, railways, mines, and entire cities. The state treated human lives as expendable resources. Stalin's crimes also deeply affected the Soviet military and national security. During the Great Terror, Stalin ordered purges of the Red Army leadership. Thousands of experienced officers were arrested or executed. This severely weakened the Soviet Union's military readiness on the eve of World War II, when Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941. The country was unprepared in many ways due to Stalin's earlier decisions. While the Soviet people eventually played a decisive role in defeating Nazi Germany, the cost was enormous. Stalin's leadership during the war was marked by brutal discipline. Soldiers who were treated without orders could be punished severely. Civilians in occupied or suspected areas were often treated as traitors. Stalin's policies toward ethnic and national groups also constitute major crimes. Entire populations were accused of collective disloyalty. During and after World War II, Several ethnic groups were forcibly deported from their homelands to distant regions of the Soviet Union. These deportations were carried out rapidly and violently. With little preparation, many people died during transport or in exile due to poor conditions and lack of resources. These actions destroyed communities and cultures that had existed for generations. The trauma of these deportations lasted long after Stalin's death. Another important aspect of Stalin's rule was the creation of a cult of personality. Stalin presented himself as a wise, heroic, and almost infallible leader. His image was everywhere, in newspapers, books, posters, and schools. Criticism was forbidden, and history was rewritten to glorify his role. This cult helped hide the reality of his crimes. Many people were afraid to speak the truth, even to close friends or family members. Fear became a normal part of everyday life. Trust between people was broken, as anyone could be reported as an enemy of the state. It is important to note that Stalin's crimes were not limited to one moment or one policy. They were systematic and long-lasting. Over decades, millions of people were affected, killed, imprisoned, starved, deported, or psychologically broken. The exact number of victims is still debated by historians, but there is no doubt that the scale of suffering was immense. After Stalin's death in 1953, some of his crimes were officially acknowledged by the Soviet leadership. Nikita Khrushchev's secret speech in 1956 exposed parts of Stalin's terror and repression. However, full accountability never occurred, and for many years, open discussion of these crimes remained limited. Today, the study of Stalin's crimes serves as a warning. It shows how absolute power, combined with ideology and fear, can lead to mass violence against one's own people. It reminds us that crimes committed by a state can be just as destructive as those committed during war. In conclusion, Joseph Stalin's rule was marked by forced collectivization, famine, political terror, mass imprisonment, ethnic deportations, and the suppression of truth. These were not isolated mistakes, but interconnected elements of a system built on control and violence. Remembering these crimes is not about the past alone. It is about recognizing the dangers of unchecked power and defending human dignity in the present and future.